Hello and welcome to Delta College Impact. I'm Roger Waller, your host for today's program. And on today's show, we're going to talk about Arthur Miller. And I know there's some of you at home who are familiar with who Arthur Miller is, and there's some of you who are saying, who is Arthur Miller? Well, let's find out. On the first half of the show, we're joined by two guests. We have Jane Dominik, an instructor in our English department. And next to Jane is Mary Hernandez, who's one of Jane's students this semester. And Jane, let's begin with you. Who is Arthur Miller?
Arthur Miller is one of the foremost playwrights of the 20th century, and he's still alive and he's still writing and producing plays. He was born in 1915. He's written for about 65 years. He's produced and published 24 plays so far, has a new one coming out in Minneapolis this spring. He's also written short stories, several essays, novels, and so forth. He's most famous for his two plays, The Crucible and Death of a Salesman. But when you start to read all of the other plays, the others are fantastic as well.
And I know, Jane, one of the keys is that you've really gotten a fascination and an interest in Arthur Miller. Yeah. And how long does that date back to?
It's embarrassing. I can't exactly remember. I do not remember when I first read a play by him. I suspect it was Death of a Salesman. I don't think it was for a course because I usually remember what I read for courses. But I do know that by the end of my undergraduate time, I chose to do an independent study and study 4 or 5 of his plays and write a paper. And that was a number of years ago. And at that point, in the back of my mind, I thought someday I'd like to write a book on Arthur Miller. I didn't know what shape that book would take, but that was just one of those lifetime goals.
Now, I know here at Delta College, Jane's been an instructor here for a number of years, and that, I'd say, what, about 10 years?
Yes, yes.
And that during that time, you teach some of our basic writing classes. And I know Mary, being a student now in Jane's class, had you been familiar with Arthur Miller before you took the class this semester?
With the exception of the one movie that I saw, it was Death of a Salesman. That was it. I knew who Mr. Miller was. I've seen and perhaps glanced some of his plays, but that was it.
And so this was really a learning experience for you.
Yes, it was, definitely.
And now, Jane, one of the exciting things, and Mary also experienced this semester, is you had a conference that really zeroed in on Arthur Miller.
Yes.
How did you get the conference here to Delta, and what's your involvement with the organization?
Well, the Arthur Miller Society, which was begun by a man named Stephen Santola, who teaches at Millersville University in Pennsylvania, no connection, purely coincidental. He began the organization in 1995, and I happened to go to, that was the first conference I had attended, it was their second, and we began the organization. I began editing their newsletter from the ground up, and since then we've had a number of Miller conferences. Usually they've been in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. And they said, we thought, well, wait a minute, what about the West Coast? We're sure people on the West Coast might be interested as well. And so we just kind of threw it out there, thought, well, maybe we'll do one out here. And I asked the administration here at Delta, is this something that you're interested in? I spoke with Jeff Wentworth in the drama department to see if he would like to direct a play to connect with the conference. And we were off and running before we knew it.
And I know we just had a graphic up there that showed a little sketch of Arthur Miller.
Yes.
And I think when people see the sketch, they sort of remember him. And I know, Mary, probably we remember him a little bit because Arthur Miller was married to Marilyn Monroe for a short period of time. And that's what I remember about Arthur Miller growing up.
I think that's unfortunate that that's how many of us remember him.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, as you got into it, and I know we talked a little bit off camera, that this was one of your first literary conferences that you attended. How did you find the experience of attending a literary conference?
I think the words I used to Jane it went over my head, many of the presentations. Several of the key speakers all had, there was a common denominator in all of them, so then I could go back and I understood a little bit more, but many of them, the papers, it was fascinating to listen, and I'm afraid I stopped taking notes after a while. But it was interesting and to hear some of the aspects of his life and how many of the papers, the presentations, nowadays we think about everything being at the present time and how many of his plays were written 40 and 50 years ago. And it's just awesome to think about that, how they just fit into our day-to-day life even now. And
I know that has to be one of the fascinating things, Jane, because not only are you a member of the society, but you also made the commitment to really focus some of your studies on Arthur Miller, and you've gone and studied in England or working on a doctorate degree focusing on Arthur Miller. Now, what did you learn in England about Arthur Miller, who's an American playwright?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I went over there primarily because Christopher Bigsby is noted as the top Miller scholar in the world, and in fact, probably the top dramatic literary critic in the world. And so I always thought, oh, I want to study with the best. And I met him, and I ended up over there. But it's also very interesting because in many ways, Miller has been revered in England and in Europe much more than here. That there's an understanding of his plays. Some of the rejection that's gone on for perhaps some political reasons in this country has not happened over there. It also, I think, is fascinating, whether it's Miller or other aspects, whether it's teaching or our society, to get a perspective from the outside. So you get two perspectives. You get actually multiple perspectives on that. So that was fascinating. It was great. And he's, again, very popular, very well known. His plays have been done in London in recent years. Until about 2 or 3 years ago, even more in this country. Now there's been a renaissance, as it were, a resurgence of his plays in New York.
And I know you had to be excited because Mr. Bigsby then came from England to be a participant in the conference.
Yes, he agreed. It was very generous of him. He agreed to come here to be the keynote speaker. It was really wonderful to have him here.
If you've been in New York recently, you would have had the chance to go to what we call a cinema in order to see a film called Focus. It's been running, or ran, for several months. I don't know if it's still running there. It's based on the novel by Arthur Miller, and it's about anti-Semitism. The shock and the surprise is when it was published. It was published in 1945, which meant that he was writing that during the war, a war that was supposedly in part to do with that, except that this novel was about American anti-Semitism. Miller has had curious critical responses over the years. One of those responses is to suggest that he is a Jewish writer who will not admit to being Jewish. Very often it's Death of a Salesman that's quoted, and David Mamet, among many others, has accused him of this. So what I'm going to talk about is really, therefore, an attempt to look at Miller as a Jewish writer.
Now, Mary, as you attended the conference and you really started to learn more about Arthur Miller, I know one of the things that you'd mentioned is how some of his concepts seem to even apply today, even though they were written 40 to 50 years ago. What were some of the ideas and concepts that you remember from some of your studies now of Arthur Miller?
Well, the conflict between a father and father and son, or the father and mother, as well as the man and wife. Mr. Miller, in many of his writings, has the what's the word I'm looking for? The confrontations that happen between a man and a woman, not necessarily his wife, perhaps just a relationship, and how those, even nowadays, the play may have been written 50 years ago, but even now we see this, and how he just had a difficult time separating himself from the one woman and then continuing on with his life, I guess is the words.
Yeah. And now, Jane, in the class, I know one of the exciting things I'm sure that Mary experienced is how you would take a play, make the assignment, and then have the students see that play performed and also talk about what the writer was doing as they developed the idea. How'd you find the students react to Arthur Miller?
I think After the Fall is a very complex play. It's one of his most complex plays in terms of number of characters, numbers of themes that are inherent, even though those themes can be traced through his other plays, and certainly the structure. It's stream of consciousness, it's in his mind, characters are coming and going. That's not a typical structural play, and some of our students have never seen a play. And so to throw that at them, or they've never read a play, to throw that at them for the first one, I threw them in the deep end and knew that, they can swim and then they'll be okay from this point forward. So that was a little challenging, but I also thought it really tied in nicely because one of the brainstorming methods that I teach with writing is to hear our own stream of consciousness, that so many times students say, I have nothing to write about, I can't think of a thing. And I said, well, no, that itself is a thought. And so to tie that into someone who has spent his entire life writing and saying, your mind works similarly to Arthur Miller's, and this is what he's done, and here you are. And that's a nice connection to make in that way.
Yeah. Mary, do you see your writing changing now as you've sat through a play and working with Jane in her class? How have you seen your writing evolve?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
I'm reading Mr. Miller, of course, as I said before, it was a little bit difficult for me to do. But yes, it has changed, my writing. It's been influenced, but greatly because of being in the class with Miss Dominik.
Now, was Arthur Miller noted for word choices or the way he framed the play, or what were some of his, I guess, traits if we think of him as a writer?
Yeah, I think some of his traits really have to do with his ethical themes, and that he usually catches characters, puts them in corners from which neither decision they make is going to be free and clear. He really takes a lot of ideas of following that American dream, of some of the conflicts between society and man. I think the primary thing that distinguishes him from me and from many people is that he's both a psychological playwright, such like O'Neill and Williams, but he's also a sociological playwright at the same time. And so that's why I felt good about bringing a conference about this particular writer to our campus and our community, because he is universal in his themes. He crosses over into philosophy, psychology, sociology, literature, art, the whole thing.
And I know we really should give Jane some, a little plug here, because Jane, when you made the decision to start this conference, how long ago was that?
Let's see, it was January of last year, so it was about 14 months.
So you really have a commitment, and was it easy to pull this all together?
No. But it was exciting because what I did, in fact, I've presented at about 15 conferences myself and attended a number of others. And so what I did is I looked at all of the conferences I had attended and just took the best ideas and said, let's throw it all together and see what comes together. And what was shocking and wonderful is that it did all come together, and the people, both who came from outside the community, found it a wonderful experience. And they said, in fact, we've set the standard now for future conferences because they really enjoyed being here at Delta. We did it upright. We had nice peripheral things, book signings and dinners and so forth. And then, as I said, it was also my main reason for doing it too was, one, to be on the West Coast, but also to community college. These conferences are not held at community colleges historically at all. And also to expose, as Mary pointed out, yes, it is over the students' heads initially, but then that's what we can expose people to. I always say if I can't take them out everywhere, then I can bring some of what I've been fortunate to experience out in the world back to them. And this was a perfect experience. So it doesn't bother me if students are lost for a while, because I think that's where learning starts.
Yeah. Mary, is that how you found it, that it was really exciting?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was interesting. And then there was also several presentations from several of his plays, so it gave many of us who had never seen any of his plays or read any of his books or plays a chance to view some of them. So
and I know one of the things that we did is we talked about the play After the Fall, and what we're going to be doing is, as we come up to the second segment of the show, we're actually going to be talking with the director, Jeff Wentworth, and one of his students who starred in After the Fall, to find out more of that transition, because you not only talked about the book, but you also gave him an opportunity to see the application. Was it scary for you pulling this conference all together?
I wanted it to go well, and I wanted people to enjoy it. I tend to be a fairly organized person and can handle lots of tasks, so that was okay. But it took a lot of work, and I think one of the things that I appreciate, and in fact on the back of our program, I'm very sincere, is there are lists of people who helped, and everyone just pitched in. That made me very, very happy that it was a community effort.
Yeah. And I think on that note, what we're going to do is we're going to come to a wrap-up of the first segment, and we're going to now learn a little bit more about the play and how you take a book and turn it into a real-life play that can have an impact on the audience. I want to thank my guests on the first half, and if you're interested in learning more about Jane and our Communication Skills Department, you can contact her here at Delta College or even call her. We have her phone number up here at 954-5414. And you can learn more about some of the exciting classes that we offer in this area. Mary, I want to thank you for joining us on our show. Jane, thank you, and congratulations on a great program. And we're going to be right back to learn more about After the Fall with Jeff Wentworth. But we're going to talk on the second half of the show with Jeff Wentworth and Catherine Old, one of our students in the drama program here at Delta College, and Jeff's one of our outstanding instructors and directors. Jeff, welcome to Impact, and let's talk a little bit about your program. I know you don't just do Arthur Miller, as we talked about on the first half, but the program involves a specialized two-year program for students.
Yeah, we actually have three major components of the drama curriculum at Delta. The general liberal arts classes like theater appreciation, acting for the camera, acting for theater, the technical classes in design. And then the second element is our productions, which are for our students to develop their acting skills as well as for the college and the community. And then the third element is our actor training program, which is a 2-year pre-professional training program that the students audition to get into, and they take a series of classes in acting and technical theater that helps prepare them when they move on from here to be more competitive.
And I know, Catherine, you've had the opportunity of really participating in this. And do you just do acting, or are there other aspects of drama that you get involved in?
I've gone all the way through all of I think every class that the drama department has offered. I'm also a student director here. I've directed 3 productions here. And I've directed a couple other places too.
And I guess you do scenes and you do set staging and everything like this.
Yes.
So that's great exposure. Now, Jeff, on the first half of the show, we talked about Arthur Miller, and Jane Dominik discussed how the workshop was involved, really focusing on him as a playwright. Now, you were able to work with Jane and actually do a play here after the fall, one of Miller's plays. How did you and Jane get together, and how did you collaborate on pulling this off?
Well, it was just a wonderful combination of events. I had gotten a call from an ex-student of mine who has been teaching at Lake Tahoe Community College for several years and was going to be having a sabbatical coming up. And he wanted to do some acting. And so David and I were talking about his coming here in March of this year, and we're kicking around some various plays. And shortly after that, Jane came to me and said that she wanted to propose doing the conference, and would the drama department be interested in doing a Miller play as part of the conference? And I told her, yes, I think so. And while we considered many of Miller's plays, we gravitated towards After the Fall right away, because it's an autobiographical play about Miller, and it is set, the principal character is supposed to be 45 years old. Well, it happens that David, my student who had contacted me, was 45. He was tall, slender, and slightly balding, so he was absolutely the perfect person as an actor physically for the role of Quentin. And interestingly enough, he had performed the role about 15 years earlier in graduate school, and he was interested at reapproaching the role 15 years later when he was the correct age and had more life experience to draw on. So it was a wonderful meshing of 2 separate things, and for our students, because the play has several characters in it, gave many students an opportunity to work on a complex Miller play, be part of the conference, and an opportunity to work with David.
Oh, I think that sounded, like you say, just the convergence of good things happening. And now, Catherine, I know you had the opportunity of actually performing in the play.
Yes.
What role did you play?
My character's name was Holga, and Holga was Arthur Miller's 3rd wife. She was an Austrian woman. The character was written after his 3rd wife, and she was an Austrian woman who had been through a great number of things herself. And Jane and I talked about this, and we kind of decided that because she had been through so much, and he had been through so much, that's why they ended up coming together the way they did.
That's interesting. It sounds like you did research beyond just reading the lines to learn more about the character. Is that something that you do on a normal basis?
This was the first play that really called for it. And Jane was really wonderful with the rest, excuse me, with the rest of our cast too, about being there and talking about the history of Miller and talking about what we needed to know for each individual character, their background, the social impact that was going on in the world during the 50s, during the McCarthy trials. So even smaller character parts had a lot of background that they could work from.
Now, Jeff, as you selected the play and you said, hey, we're going to do After the Fall, how did you find yourself getting into the materials and actually working with the students on a relatively complex program, a dialogue that was very intense, and how did that work out?
Well, as Jane pointed out, we made this decision about 14 months before the production was to go on. So we made the decision. I was very excited by the decision. And then about 6 months before we were to go into rehearsal, I needed to start doing my preparation. And I must admit, at one point I said to myself, why did I choose this play? It is so difficult. The reason is, as Jane pointed out, that it's stream of consciousness. And so Quentin is on stage all of the time, but none of the events are chronological. So within the play, suddenly his mother appears. And you have to figure out whether it's his mother when he was age 5, age 12, age 40, age 35. And appears. Does she walk on? Do the lights come up and she's there? And there are about 30 characters in the play. And so all of these entrances and exits overlap. Many times characters are watching Quentin while he's in a scene. So it necessitated that I block, that is, put down the movement on paper for the entire play, which entailed about 85 pages of diagrams for all of these 30 characters. And I had to do that with the set design that John White had given me, and I had to complete that and go over it with John because we had to build the set, and if we didn't have the blocking and this done, we didn't know if the set would work. And then the same thing with the lighting. So we actually went over all of the blocking 6 months in advance, all of the light cues, and there were about 175 light cues, and there were like 80 sound cues in the show. And so all the sound had to be done that far in advance. So it was truly the most complex show that I've ever worked on, and more time-consuming than in the preparation than any show I've ever done. But it was a great challenge, and I was very pleased by the end result with the acting as well as the design elements, the lighting, the sound, and the set itself. So
it's amazing, but it looks so easy on stage. And when we say so easy on stage, we're looking at another drama production here. And I know you talked about John White and another instructor in the program, and how much coordination is really required between you as you work on different plays. And what are we watching in this case, Jeff?
This is the opening of Comedy of Errors, and this is actually John White playing an old man who has lost both of his adult sons. And this sounds a little bleak for Comedy of Errors, but after this opening scene, we follow the story as he is reunited with both of his adult sons.
Oh, I think it's really kind of fun, and I know, Catherine, did you realize all the work that these directors had to do and as they put together work like this?
I was really lucky the first show that I directed to work very closely with Carlos, who had set out a list of things that I needed to accomplish. So far as I'd never diagrammed anything before outside of a very short scene, for class. Mm-hmm. And I did, I learned a lot that first production. I've been able to apply it and change it as need be to fit how I work since then.
Now you talked about Carlos. You might want to identify who Carlos is.
Carlos Chavarria is also an instructor here. He teaches acting. He's also instructed playwriting courses, and he's often the instructor that...
he's the sponsor for the drama club.
For the drama club. He works very closely with student productions too.
Yeah, so you really have quite the involved faculty as far as getting a lot of effort out of the students. Now, when you start to teach some of these classes, and it sounded like you had to go in and study up on Arthur Miller as well, yes. One of the things that I guess you have to talk about is how you integrate all these resources together. How do you do that with the students, and how do you give them that experience?
Well, within class, we try to identify those students that seem to have the potential for having interest in direct or design, because even these student productions or the workshop productions generally have to have stage managers and someone doing simplistic props and scenic elements. And when you see the enthusiasm as well as the sense of responsibility and the sense of commitment that happens with certain students, then these projects kind of just blossom out of enthusiasm and interest.
Now, how do you evaluate the students? I mean, do they get graded based on their performance? I mean, when Catherine's up there and you say, hey, that was an A performance. I know I'm sitting in the audience and I'm thinking, hey, that's an A performance or B performance. What's involved in evaluating the student outcomes?
We're very fortunate in theater because our students are there because they really want to be. They have a very strong interest and a strong commitment. It is very, very seldom that we have a student drop out of a play or a technical responsibility. And when that does happen, it usually is because of some outside conflict, like a work schedule that changes, and so they're going to lose their job if they can't accommodate whatever they've been given. And so unlike like a general like liberal arts math class or English class where students are required to take it, and oftentimes the drop rates are quite high, sometimes because of frustration or lack of interest, our students are so highly motivated that we generally have a really positive experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Now, Catherine, as you've been involved in the program and you've started to not only act, but also to direct, which one do you enjoy most?
I can't separate them. Whenever I'm involved in a show, it's, as an actor, I find something new. I found a whole lot in After the Fall that I just really hadn't experienced in a long time. And also, I'm very fortunate that when I get to direct, I realize that having been on stage really accommodates directing. I think that I grow as a director if I grow as an actor. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. Now I do have to ask you. You mentioned how the role you played was an Austrian woman. Did you have to learn an accent?
Yes, I did.
Oh, did you really?
Yes, I did.
Was this your first role that you had to do a different accent?
No. Jeff has been very kind about letting me have roles this was a German accent specifically. I've done a Russian accent, I've done a Norwegian accent, High British, Cockney. I've done at least that many. That's all I can come up with off the top of my head.
Well, I do accents and they all sound the same. You know, when I do those, so you have to work on that. Now, Jeff, I know as you look at the program, how long in advance do you set your plays and productions? Is it that year in advance?
Yeah, we plan about a year in advance. We've just completed, we're a little late this semester in making our final decision about the plays for next year. One of the reasons is because we're still looking for an instructor for the children's play in the fall. And we really feel that instructor should have some input on the actual title of the play rather than just being said, here, you're going to direct this. Yeah. And so, yeah, we usually plan a year, sometimes a year and a half in advance.
Yeah. Well, and I know one of the exciting things for the people who live here in Stockton is the opportunity to actually see some of the plays performed. And that's one of the keys. And if you want to find out more about our programs here at Delta College, you can contact Jeff at 954-5423, or look in the catalog and you'll see some plays listed, or contact our box office and find out some of the performance schedules that we have coming up. Not only drama, I have to put in a plug for the music programs and the dance programs as well, as we have an outstanding fine arts program here at Delta College. Well, I want to thank all of my guests and thank Jeff and Catherine for joining me on this segment of the show. I hope you've all learned a little bit more about Arthur Miller and have an opportunity of coming down to see some of our programs here at Delta College. Thanks for watching Impact, and I hope to see you at a future program. Bye-bye.
I've got those